The floor drops out from under you. 1 second, you're standing in the dark. The next, a wooden platform lifts you up through a trapdoor and into the light. 50,000 people are screaming. The sand under your feet is warm. You look down and you understand why. It's soaked with someone else's blood. Welcome to the Colosseum. And you, a soft modern person who has never held a weapon in your life, have just been chosen to entertain the most bloodthirsty crowd in history. The question is simple. Could you survive it? Almost certainly not. But how you die depends entirely on one thing you don't know yet: what time of day it is. Let's start with where you're standing. The year is around 80 AD. This building is brand new. The Emperor Titus opened it with 100 straight days of games, 100 days of killing, to celebrate the grandest arena the world had ever seen. Above you, tier after tier of stone, packed with 50,000 Romans, senators in the front rows, the poorest citizens at the very top. Everyone, from the emperor down, is here to watch people die. And that sand you're standing on, it's not decoration. The Latin word for sand is arena. It's where we get the word arena. They spread it across the floor for one reason: to soak up the blood, so the show doesn't turn into a swamp. But the crowd isn't what decides whether you live. Something underneath your feet does. And that's where the timing comes in. Because the Colosseum ran on a schedule. A brutal, precise schedule. And which part of the day you were dragged into decided exactly what kind of death was waiting for you. The morning belonged to the beasts. Exotic animals, hauled in from every corner of the empire. Lions, leopards, bears, even elephants and rhinos. At the opening games alone, ancient sources claim around 9,000 animals were killed. They were hunted, displayed, and slaughtered for the crowd's amusement. And the scale only grew. Decades later, the Emperor Trajan threw games that ran for 123 days and killed some 11,000 animals. This was not a rare spectacle. This was Roman entertainment, running for centuries. If you're pushed out in the morning, you're facing something with teeth and claws that hasn't been fed. The afternoon belonged to the gladiators, the main event, the professionals. But the middle of the day, noon, belonged to something else entirely. And this is the part you need to understand. If you were marched onto that sand at midday, you were not a fighter. You were not part of the show. You were the intermission. Noon was for executions. Condemned criminals, prisoners, enemies of Rome, brought out unarmed or barely armed, and killed in front of a crowd that was mostly there on a lunch break. No skill, no chance, no mercy. So the first thing that decides your fate isn't strength, it's the clock, and you don't control the clock. Now let's say you survive long enough to notice what's beneath you, because the real genius of this place, and the real horror, was hidden under the floor. Under the sand was a wooden platform, and under that was the hypogeum, a 2-level maze of tunnels, cages, and machinery running the entire length of the arena. Down there, in the dark, they kept the animals and the fighters. Dozens of trapdoors and elevators, worked by ropes and pulleys, could lift a starving lion or a doomed prisoner straight up into the light with no warning. Think about what that means for you. You're standing on the sand, the crowd roars, and you have no idea whether the floor beside you is about to open and what's going to come up out of it. The Romans engineered suspense. They built a machine for surprise death. Quick thing, because if you're the kind of person who actually wants to understand how these worlds worked, not just the myths, the real mechanics, subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel. Now, back to the sand, because it's finally time to talk about the gladiators. And almost everything you think you know about them is wrong. Here's the myth. 2 men walk in, and only one walks out. Every fight to the death. That's not how it worked. Gladiators were expensive, extremely expensive. Training a fighter took years. In real schools like the Ludus Magnus right next to the Colosseum, their owners fed them, treated their wounds, hired doctors. A trained gladiator was an investment, and you don't destroy your best investment for one afternoon's applause. So most fights did not end in death. A beaten gladiator could raise a finger, a gesture the Romans called ad digitum, to appeal for mercy. And the decision to spare him or kill him came down to the man running the games, usually swayed by the roar of the crowd. Which means survival wasn't only about winning, it was about performance. Fight bravely, entertain them, earn their respect, and even in defeat you might walk out alive. But here's your problem. That entire system rewards skill, and you have none. The man across from you has trained for years. Maybe he's a secutor, armored, with a short sword. Maybe a retiarius, circling you with a weighted net and a 3-pronged trident, waiting for you to panic. He's done this 100 times. He knows exactly how amateurs move, and you are the most obvious amateur he has ever seen. You wouldn't get the finger, you wouldn't get the mercy, you'd get seconds. And don't imagine you could simply refuse. People tried. The arena kept staff for exactly that. Men with whips and red-hot iron bars, waiting at the edges, whose only job was to drive terrified fighters back into the middle. There was no sitting down, no walking away. The only way off that sand was to win, to be spared, or to be dragged off it. And even if, somehow, you survived the sand, the Colosseum still isn't done with you, because the fighting was only the first danger. A cut from a blade, in a world with no antibiotics, could kill you days later through infection. Every wound was a slow gamble with your life. And then there's the part no one talks about, the mind. Standing on that floor, with 50,000 people howling for your death, the sound alone breaks people. That's not a metaphor. The terror itself was a weapon. So, could you survive the Roman Colosseum? No. And it's worth being honest about why. Not because you're weak, because this was a profession, a craft that took years to learn, and you'd be an amateur dropped into the deep end with no training, no allies, and seconds to figure it out. The people who lived didn't just fight hard. They turned survival into a skill, and a performance, and a career. And here's the takeaway that changes how you see this whole place. The Colosseum was not chaos. That's the thing we get wrong. It was the opposite of chaos. It was a machine, scheduled, engineered, monetized down to the sand. 100 days of death, run with the precision of a modern stadium. The gladiators who survived understood that. They didn't beat the machine with muscle, they learned its rules and made the crowd love them. You wouldn't get the chance, because in that arena, you were never the gladiator. You were just the sand.